It was cold. Shivering had roused him from unconsciousness. His eyes opened slowly, but it was too dark to survey his surroundings. Terrakan pushed himself off of the ground and onto his knees, but a sharp pain hammered his skull and echoed behind his eyes. He grasped at the back of his head and attempted to wince the pain away. As the ache subsided, Terrakan fondled to find a safe place to stand. His hand found the splintered wood against which he had bumped his head. Where was his helmet? He patted at the tile floor inquisitively. His fingers traced the shaft of his battle axe. Years of training with the heirloom weapon had burned the texture of its handle into his memory. He snatched it, and having sufficiently explored the space above him, slowly stood up. The hall was black with shadows. He might as well close his eyes, as they offered no sense of place or direction. He reaffirmed his grasp of the axe in one hand and held the other out. He concentrated. The pulse in his fingertips throbbed. The sanguine rhythm moved past each knuckle, dragged warmth from the tips down to the palm. His hand was feverish. An animal instinct, panicked at the prospect of being scorched, tugged against the muscles in his shoulders, but Terrakan had tamed those muscles long ago, and obediently held his hand steady. Terrakan opened his eyes. The flare lapping in his palm cast the shadows of his fingers dancing across his face. The shadows that dressed the hall were singed away. He could discern the stairwell at the corridor's end. "Who is there?" came a question, so distant that it was practically a whisper. The voice was demanding and familiar. Terrakan turned and moved toward the sound. He ducked beneath some collapsed rafters and took wide steps over others. He approached cautiously, unsteady and unbalanced, as both of his hands were already too occupied to help keep him aloft. "My way." A quiver in the air rained dust down on him. Terrakan leapt back from the high-pitched whistle of more wood snapping from the rafters. His fall to the floor snuffed the fire in his hand, and the hallway was again painted pitch with shadows. Terrakan cowered as heavy stone vaults followed the collapsed wood to shatter the floor's tiles like thin ice. It seemed to him a miracle that the tower still stood. As the crumbling masonry faded back to mere trickles of dust, Terrakan spared the hallway a second glance. The threshold beneath one door was pooled with light. Terrakan maneuvered toward it. He stepped into the glowing puddle. Shadows streaked back from his heels. Terrakan fondled for the handle. He pressed on the wrought iron grip. The door swung open easily, almost loose on its hinges. A large room opened before him. In it everything was strewn. The canopy bed had been crushed beneath the collapsed timbers. A shattered mirror spilled splinters beneath its toppled frame. The green glass that had once paned the window now jutted like teeth from the sills. The only thing in the room still standing was a female figure, almost human, only too small, too thin, and with the entirely wrong complexion of the green of a glacial lake. Her eyes were pits of black oil that rippled with delight. Her arachnid fingers danced as they approached the queen's belly. Osmara was leaned as far back as she could get from the fairy's hand, but it would not be deterred. The fingers strained for their target. Osmara stared aghast as the tips slid under her black velvet dress. They pressed against her navel, traced circles on her skin. Osmara pleaded for her body to repel the molestation, but too much of her control seemed to have already succumbed to the pixie's anesthetizing touch. "No, not that much beyond my power," the pixie observed. "You are not so great as to resist this gift." The queen's dark skin peeled open to accept the pixie's fingertips, drank in the pixie's black fingernails. "Because you do not mind, I will find a child with which to play." The celadon wrist glowed hot as it slithered into the skin. The pixie sank her arm in elbow deep. Osmara could feel the fingers swimming through her muscles, could feel them rummaging through her gut. Terrakan had only ever heard about it, gleaned details from stories which he had either heard by the hearth or read in small vellum journals. Seeing the changeling process firsthand, however, was abominable. He gripped the battle axe tighter and slipped silently through the swinging door. His ankles braided his sneaking steps one after the next to approach the exchange. Almost 2 decades of lessons and lectures rambled through his head. He could hear his mother correcting his tread, remember to sink into each step. His father's voice counted his pace, counted down the distance, counted the moments until he was primed to strike. He slipped into range unnoticed. He studied the scene for an opportunity, for a cue to strike. The queen and the pixie were far too close. He might cut her majesty if his swing was off by even the shortest distance. He begged her to lean back. He wanted to take one more breath, but instinct cried the command. The pixie lurched into the slash that gashed open her belly. The yawning wound vomited mud over her hands as they rushed to clutch the cut closed. Sludge drained between the fingers and puddled at her feet. The pixie raised her gaze from the spilling wound to the assailant, but there was hardly a chance to recognize him. The hack had only been the first in a combination of successive attacks. Muscles had been trained to tense and turn with instinctive reflex. The momentum of the initial strike was carried into the following blow. A hammer counterbalanced the weight of the axe, while the dropping hack rent flesh apart. An upward jack smashed the jaw of the susceptibly positioned fairy. The blow threw her across the room and out through a jagged hole in the wall where the quake had crumbled mortar and masonry. The pixie was gone. Terracon fell to his knees and picked Osmara up. Her head dropped back, and she seemed to cast her amethyst stare toward the cracked ceiling. Terracon pulled her into him and lifted her so that they could look into each other's eyes. "What hope did you have?" Terracon's voice could hardly restrain the passion from his pleading. "Your Majesty, please." Begging betrayed his composure. "Tell me, if you have a child, what hope do you have for it?" Terracon yelled in the hope of reaching any remnants of the queen. The pixie had withdrawn its rummaging hand too quickly, and the furrows she had raked could not suture themselves shut before Osmara became conscious of them. The great pressure of knowing their presence caused them to bubble up and seep through stress fractures until they could at last escape Osmara as a great, belly-deep scream. She gasped to fill her suffocated lungs. She failed to slough off the remnant shackles of the pixie's toxins. There was no pixie to shirk off, however. There was no imminent threat. She was not sure what was there. She made manic twists to see her surroundings. There was only rubble, and a young soldier whom cradled her in his lap. Only him, leaned back, wary of her flails, but watching tentatively. She clutched her arms closely to her, afraid to touch him, afraid to touch anything. Slowly, Osmara surrendered to an understanding that he was a safe thing. His presence reinforced her confidence, and the excess paranoia drained away. Her panting slowed to a steady rhythm. She laced her arms around him. She pulled him close. Osmara sobbed her relief. His shoulder was stained with her hot, heavy tears. Terracon sympathized. He sighed, confident that her sanity was secure. "The baby," he begged again. "What hope do you have for the baby?" Baby! She had not remembered. She needed to be reminded. "I want my baby!" Tears choked her words. "I want a healthy baby girl." She still had hope for the child. The pixie had not changed it. Terracon closed his arms around her, embraced, and made personal her hope.